Thank you all for being here. On behalf of the faculty, staff, and students at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us for such a special event. My name is Zephyr Taj, and I'm a Kevin B. Harrington Student Ambassador. The Institute's mission is to educate, engage, and inform citizens to actively participate in the civic and political life of their communities, truly strengthening both democracy and political discourse. Here at NHIOP, we've been fortunate to welcome many past presidential confidants. Tonight's speaker, Corey Lewandowski, is our first for 45. Corey served as the chief political advisor and campaign manager for Donald Trump from that escalator ride in New York City through their primary victory in June. A native of nearby Lowell and a graduate of UMass Lowell, Corey began his career as a political staffer on Capitol Hill at the Concord State House and on campaigns across the country. He worked for the Republican National Committee for a brief time, also spent time in lobbying here in New England and with the Koch brothers at Americans for Prosperity. Tonight, Corey is going to join Mr. Neil Levesque, the Institute's executive director, for a wide-ranging conversation. They'll discuss not only the 2016 election and their New Hampshire primary victory, but also President Trump's style, his character, and ability to deliver on promises made during the campaign. It's an honor to have somebody so connected to the White House in this time here in New Hampshire, and we're honored to have Corey and Mr. Neil Levesque here for what should be a terrific conversation. So, welcome.
Welcome back, Corey.
Good to be home.
I think you've spent more time at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics than probably any other place but Trump Tower in the past maybe 2 years.
I think my wife can attest to that. True, yes, yes.
So, as we get started, I just want to say and ask the question, the apparent question, which is, how does a sort of a kid from the wrong side of the tracks, product of a single mother from Lowell, Massachusetts, go on to sort of manage and create this winning campaign for president?
You know, you wake up and you don't know. You work hard, which I think is a value that was instilled in me very young. When they tell you you can't do something, you don't listen to them. When they say you'll never be successful, you disregard that. And I think at some level, maybe it puts a little bit of a chip on your shoulder to say, yeah, I can do that. And just because I didn't go to an Ivy League school or had the best grades or whatever it may have been doesn't mean you can't substitute hard work. And I've been so very fortunate. And the other part is you take chances in life. I had a great job with Americans for Prosperity, and that job wasn't going to go anywhere. But I was asked to go meet with then, Donald Trump, ultimately candidate Trump, and now President Trump, and took a job that my friends, my colleagues, probably some of my family never thought was going to go anywhere. But sometimes you have to take a chance to be successful, and I've been lucky.
Did you think you were going to run a campaign for president ever? Did you ever think, even being from New Hampshire, where you sort of have this type of exposure, that you would ever take this kind of job?
No, it was never my goal to run a presidential campaign. It wasn't. I know some people, that's their lifelong goal. I had done races at the local level, the state level, and congressional, and gubernatorial, and Senate. But campaigns are tough. They're tough on the people who do them, and they're tough on the family, and they're so cyclical, because if you win, you might have a job for a few years, but when you lose, you're out of work, right? And now I've got a family, and it's much, much more difficult if you're going to go into a campaign thinking, hey, if I lose, what do I do for the next 2 years or 4 years, whatever that may be? And it was never, ever my goal to go run a presidential campaign, and I'm so lucky to have this opportunity and to have a front row seat of history for the last 2 years.
So Trump invites you up to Trump Tower. He sits you down. He hires you on the spot. What was that like after that? I mean, have you had a day off since?
No, it was so surreal. Like, Mr. Trump is so magnanimous. President Trump is so magnanimous. He's so good when you go to meet him. He's so embracing. He brings you in close. And when I went to go to Trump Tower back in January 2015, I didn't even know why I was going, candidly. A friend of mine said, hey, would you come to New York with me and to see Donald Trump? I said, who doesn't want to go there? Sure. So I drove to New York and waited, and the night before my friend called me up and said, hey, I can't make it tomorrow, you're on your own. So I don't even know what I'm doing. Right? I'm just going. I guess I'll go see Donald Trump. I don't want to go see Donald Trump. So I went there, and I waited around and walked into the 26th floor of his office. And he was sitting behind his desk, and the first thing he said was, look at you. You know, he said, you got a good look. And I said, okay. Yeah, that was pretty cool, right? And then he asked me about a couple of people who I guess he had interviewed for the judge. He says, you know Johnny and Billy and Bobby? And I said, yeah, I know those guys. He says, are they any good? I said, yeah, they're pretty good. He said, you think you're better than them? I said, yes, sir, I do. And he said, you know New Hampshire? I said, yes, I do know New Hampshire. He said, okay. You want to run my campaign for president? I said, you're kidding. He's not running for president. Who are we kidding, right? We know this. And he said to me very candidly, he said, what do you think the odds of me running for president are and winning? What do you think the odds of running and winning are? I said, 5%. And he looked at me and he said, 10%. I said, let's meet in the middle, 7.5. He said, done. And that was it. And that's how we started. And he shook my hand. He stood up and he said, you're hired. Now, I had a job. And I didn't tell my wife. I was sitting there having this conversation with Donald Trump. And he shook my hand and said, okay, you're hired. Go on, get out. And then he said, I'll see you on Monday. And I said, well, sir, I have a job. He said, oh, no, you work for me now. And I left his office, and I think I called my wife, and I said, I think I just took a new job in New York.
So how much management was this, or was it more containment? I mean, he seems like the type of person where you don't actually put a plan together and then say, this is what you're going to say today. Was it more like he would go out and he'd roll these things out in these rallies, and then you'd have to react to them, or what was it like?
You know, it was amazing, because it was a very small core group of us that started the campaign together. And
5 people, right?
5 of us, yeah. It's pretty amazing.
Who were the 5?
So we hired George DeGicos to do all of our advanced work. He was a great advanced guy, one of the best. Hope Hicks was our communications person. Michael Glasser was our deputy, was our political director and became our deputy. And Dan Scavino, who did social media, and me. That was a whole team. That was a whole presidential team, no exaggeration. Then we hired Chuck Lodner in Iowa and Matt Zapolowski here in New Hampshire and 2 guys down in South Carolina. That was the entire presidential campaign. Couldn't put them in a minivan, right? But the bond that those 5 people had, because they had one singular focus, which was to make Donald Trump the next president of the United States, was unbelievable. And during that period of time, it's like a small company, right? There were no leaks. There was nobody leaking stories to the media because there was nobody to leak to, right? It was just 5 of us. Everyone made every decision together. The group was very cohesive. And what we knew in that period of time is when we were exceptionally successful, right? Went on to Iowa, a state where Donald Trump wasn't supposed to compete, let alone do well, and he finished second. He lost 1 electoral vote to Ted Cruz, 1 delegate. Ted got 8, we get 7. Came to New Hampshire, won by 20 points, right? We had some
What was that night like?
Oh, look. It was, let me tell you something. When you work for Donald Trump, winning solves problems, okay? And look, there was a lot of pressure after Iowa. And I remember it very well because we were here, we had a small office over here on Granite Street, and I've told this story, but it's important to remind people. We left Iowa that night, and we finished in 2nd place, which was a win for basically every other candidate, because Rubio's strategy was, finish 3rd, finish 2nd, finish 1st, and go on. Donald Trump's strategy was, I'm going to win every state. I'm going to win all 50. I said, no one's ever done that, sir. We've been in 1st place for a long time. No one's ever done it. I want to win all 50. Finished 2nd in Iowa, met our goals. Long flight home. Came to New Hampshire. And he was not in a very good mood. And I was working at the office here in Manchester. And he went up and he did a couple of events. And then it was a Wednesday after, and I said, sir, I need to speak with you. We came in the office and I said, here's where your numbers are, sir. You're starting to fall. We had a pretty good lead in New Hampshire, and if you don't start to outline what your vision is for America and just want to complain about the results in Iowa, you're going to be a candidate who also ran for president of the United States one day. And with that, he literally turned around. He went up to Manchester Police, did a shift change that day, saw one of the officers who had just come out of the hospital, came over, then he went and did a town hall in Manchester with CNN, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, positive. Our guys are out knocking doors in the blizzard. And
so the strategy was sort of let Trump be Trump. Go to these rallies. I mean, the rallies and the tweets are sort of the 2 things that really differentiate him from other campaigns. So you would let him go to a rally, but there wasn't any preconceived notion, I think we're going to hit this issue today, or it was just go do it.
No, sometimes we had a plan. Sometimes we talked about what we wanted to talk about, and I can think specifically of, December 7th of 2015, we talked about rolling in a Muslim ban. And there's a lot of discussion about that. It's very controversial as we did that, but we did it on a battleship in South Carolina. Many times, we knew what the basic premise of the speech was going to be. We would say, hey, maybe we should talk about the snake tonight, or these different narratives that he would roll into his speeches. But I used to say, let Trump be Trump. See, I always equate Donald Trump to a great racehorse, that you have to let him run. I mean, he's the American Pharaoh of American politics, right? It's not my job to put a bridle on him and say, sir, for 40 years you've had unparalleled success in the business world, and the television world, the book world, and every other thing you've ever done, and guess what, I'm going to tell you what to do now. That's not my job. My job is to put blinders on him and guide him into the corners a little bit and tell him, hey, we're going to be careful on this one. That's what I tried to do. And he's had his finger on the pulse of the American people. If you go back and look at the interviews he did with Oprah Winfrey back in 1989, exact same messaging he said when he ran for president in 2015 and 2016. He fundamentally understood and understands what's wrong with the country and wants to change it.
But isn't it really hard to do that too when you're turning on television, all the campaign managers, all the analysts are saying, you got to put a bridle on this guy, they need to go, he needs to apologize, he needs to do this, and you're saying, no, let him do it. And you must have felt a lot of vindication at the end. You know what the press didn't see, but the American people saw was they wanted to change. We went up to, I told the story, we went up to Laconia, New Hampshire one day in the summer of 2015. 2015, went up to the summer, right after we announced the campaign. And we took the small plane from New York's LaGuardia Airport, and we landed up at Laconia's airport. And in that period of time, I got off the plane, I had about 15 phone messages from the same number. I said, this can't be good. Right? So it was this number, and I listened, it was this police officer. He said, we've got a problem. And we were hoping to have 150 people in the VFW hall up there that night. It's a Friday night, and I figured it was an accident or something, nobody was there. So he's trying to give us a heads up. And he called up and he said, we got to send a cruiser to come up and get you guys at the airport. This is a private Secret Service protection because we have so many people that had closed the road. I said, excuse me? He says, yeah, we're going to come get you. We pulled into this facility. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. It was 120 degrees inside. There were literally people standing on the roof of this building. We pulled in these two black SUVs. People came to the cars. They started shaking the car. It was like being with a true celebrity, right? Like a rock concert celebrity. They shook the car, and Donald Trump went in. He gave this speech. And as we left, we got in the SUVs, and there were people outside everywhere. You couldn't even fit in the building. And the people started chasing the cars as we left the parking lot. And I said, there's something special going on here. There's something different that nobody else sees. And people would wait in line. Lowell, Massachusetts, my hometown, blue-collar town. They waited in line for 8 hours in a blizzard in January of 2016 to see Donald Trump speak at the Paul Saunders Center. I saw it time and time and time again. And what the media failed to understand was, if you wait in line to see someone for 8 hours in a blizzard, you don't support him. You don't want to see that narrative. So on we'll call it the McCain day, the day he said what he said about John McCain, that must have been a big low. So did that take you off your game and maybe question whether or not you should be letting Trump be Trump?
That was a tough day. We were in Iowa, and it was still early in the campaign, and we went out to give a speech, and the plan was we'd give a speech, you do a press conference, and we had 2 other events, and then we'd fly back. Land on the plane, get to the facility, he does a meet and greet, does a speech with Frank Luntz, gets up, and I'm waiting for him basically right at the door, and I said, he says, pretty good, huh? I said, sir, can I speak to you for a second over here? He says, a pretty good speech, right? I said, sir, can I speak to you in this green room? I close the door. And this is where you have to understand Donald Trump. It took me a long time to understand it. And I'd been on the campaign now not for too long. We had just launched in June. This was in July, I think. I said, sir, you just said John McCain wasn't a war hero. He spent a number of years in a prison camp on behalf of our country. I think we need to apologize. He said, no, see, this is the difference. John McCain hasn't done enough for our veterans. And we have people dying in Phoenix, Arizona, waiting in line. The veterans deserve better, and John McCain hasn't done enough. I said, sir, you don't understand. Right? What you just said is never, this campaign's going to be over. He said, let's go downstairs and have a press conference. We walked downstairs from that facility, he held a 28-minute, probably the most contentious press conference I'd ever seen in my life. We leave the facility, get back on the plane, and I remember I called my wife and said, guess what, campaign's over, we're coming home, right? It's gonna be a quick one. And all my friends are right, I'll never work in politics again, right? That was the Sunday show. Until one author came out and said, you know what, Donald Trump is absolutely right. John McCain hasn't done enough. And there were people who you know that became part of this campaign, friends of the president, who would call me on that particular Saturday. We flew up to Bedminster, New Jersey when we landed. It was just 4 of us in the room. And friends, close friends of the president, candidate Trump, said, you need to apologize. You cannot survive this. The best. I mean, the best minds in the political space said, you cannot apologize. He said, I'm going to double down. Because I will make sure the veterans have what they want. He's a fighter, and he's going to fight for what he believes in. I said, wow.
Does he ever apologize in public?
You know, he apologized
Sounds
after.
like he doubles down on things.
Look, he's a genuine fighter. Because for his entire life, and I know you guys don't believe this, he was told he couldn't do things. You know, you can't go and build in New York. That's not where we're from. His father would tell him. You know, that's for a different group of people. You know, we're very good at Brooklyn, but New York or Manhattan is different for us. Don't do that. He has such a tenacity, such an ability to move people when he puts his mind to it. I think it's hard to apologize because he's so strong in what his beliefs are that he wants everyone to believe the way he does.
Now, you mentioned earlier that he was at one point in a little bit of a bad mood. Describe what he's like. I mean, there are different characteristics when somebody's in a really bad mood. You know, Bill Clinton had a terrible temper apparently, and other candidates and presidents have. And you spend all this time with someone in a small campaign jet or a bus or what have you, and the tempers flare. So tell me what it's like when he gets upset.
You know, you get to know somebody when you spend as much time as I did with him. 18 hours a day, 7 days a week for 18 months. On the airplane alone in that period of time, we flew 1,400 hours on the plane. 1,400 hours. It's about 60 days straight, just being on the airplane. And
It's a nice plane though.
It's nice. 60 days is a long time on any airplane. We had the best plane and the worst food. You know, McDonald's, Burger King. You know, if we're lucky, Chick-fil-A, not too often. But you get to know somebody, and you have to understand when Donald Trump is angry about something, it's because traditionally the staff has failed to deliver on what his expectations were. And I took that very, very personally. You know, he wasn't angry after losing or coming in second place in Iowa. He was disappointed. And that falls on me as the campaign manager to say, I didn't do my job well enough. I didn't know what else I could have done. And looking back, of course you could have done things differently. But when he yelled at me or was more disappointed in me in the campaign, I took it very personally because I'd given up so much to be part of it. But you have to understand, you're with someone, particularly candidate who's running for office, at the highest of the highs, right? The biggest things they've ever done in their life. Running for President of the United States of America. Becoming the President of the United States. Everything else is poultry. It doesn't matter. It's secondary. But those days like Wisconsin, they were tough. Days where we lost elections, they were tough. They were real tough.
You're kind of known for driving a tight ship. You, during campaigns, you have a little bit of an edge sometimes. You like things on time. Is that kind of a persona that you take on during those campaigns? You seem to just rather enjoying the post-campaign period, but you know, you have a little bit of a General Patton persona.
I run hot, as Steve Bannon would say sometimes. But you know what it is? What I told our staff, and what I would always tell our staff is, every single day Donald Trump would get up and give us his very best. And if we're not willing to do that, then we shouldn't be here. This is a man who will work 18 or 20 hours a day without blinking. Never complains. Never once did he ever say to me, Corey, why am I going to Mobile, Alabama in August to give a speech to 35,000 people in front of a football? So he never questioned it. Just said, I'm going to go because this is what you told me to do. It was amazing. It was an amazing amount of responsibility to be able to dictate his calendar like that without ever any questions. And what I didn't have a tolerance for, what I would never have a tolerance for, is for some staffer to say to me, well, I was tired and I showed up at work at 9:15 today. I don't buy that.
So
Because I expect if we're going to meet a deadline, You gotta be there on time. The deadlines are there for a reason. And we got Donald Trump on the ballot, not with a team of attorneys and 50 guys who told us we can never do it. We did with 2 people. And they said, you can't do it. Of course we can do it. We always did more with less because we pushed people the hardest.
So on that same note, are you happy with his staff now? Because there seem to be a lot of leaks. There's certainly some mistakes in the beginning part of the presidency. And now you're watching some of this on TV. Obviously, you're in connection with the president. But are you disappointed, or what's your feelings of the staff right now?
Look, I think there's a couple different components of it. I think a big piece of the staff, at the end of the presidential campaign, where most campaigns have thousands of people, and the president has to go fill all of these jobs throughout the government to reward these people, we had 200 people in the whole campaign. 200 people. That's a decent-sized U.S. Senate race in some places.
And the Clinton campaign had, what, 800?
They had 800 people in their Brooklyn office alone. In their Brooklyn office, they had 800 people, let alone what they had out in the States. And so what you have at the beginning part of the administration is you have a bunch of people who either A, didn't work on the campaign, that have a desire to come back to federal government or work in federal government, someone who don't know Donald Trump or the campaign, or B, have a different agenda. And it's not the president's agenda because they don't know the president. And so, I think when it comes to national security policy, I think he's assembled one of the very best teams possible with General Kelly and General Mattis, H.R. McMaster. That team of generals is very, very strong. I'm very confident in that. But it is an obligation of the staff to push back on the president if they don't think he is either saying or doing the right thing. And the people that he has around him right now just don't have that type of experience and longevity with him in some instances to do that. And I really see the president as a person who understands 2 different types of staffers. And I mean this in the best possible sense. There are people who are the president's contemporaries, the people who have achieved a massive amount of wealth or success in their own right. General Mattis, General Kelly, Stephen Mnuchin at Treasury, Belinda McMahon at Small Business, Dr. Carson at HUD, very wealthy in their own right, absolute pinnacles of their career. And then you have staff. You have staff who are literally the nuts and bolts of running a day-to-day operation, who are much less likely, in my opinion, to be able to tell the president difficult things because they don't either A, have a relationship, or B, he doesn't see them as contemporary. So it's a tough position, and you have to be willing sometimes to have those very tough conversations. I had a lot of tough conversations with the president. I always said to him, candidate Trump, all you can do is make me go back to New Hampshire. It's the worst thing that can happen to me. I got a pretty good life in New Hampshire.
So what about Steve Miller? How does he fit in, though?
Steve's a true ideologue. He's a person who I hired back in January of 2016 to come join the campaign. He's a big picture thinker. He truly, fundamentally believes that the government should be smaller, more efficient, leaner. And he is someone who I think, and I don't speak for Steve Miller, but who truly believes in putting Americans first. I know that sounds pejorative if you're from some other country. Steve's not an isolationist, but he said it's time to put American people first.
You mentioned Bannon. Bannon seems to be of great interest to everyone in the media, probably because he doesn't speak that much to the media with the exception of CPAC. Tell me about Steve Bannon. He's been around since even before you were around.
Steve and the president had a long relationship. Steve is someone who is exceptionally brilliant. Most people don't give him the credit that he deserves, candidly. Navy officer, went to Goldman Sachs, made a fortune, owned a small piece of something called Seinfeld, maybe you've heard of it, right? Steve has done very, very well. And then he went off and worked in Hollywood. Then he started with Andrew Breitbart, who was a visionary, joined that and built Breitbart into what it is today. Steve has been advising and counseling Mr. Trump, candidate Trump, and President Trump for a long time. And I think you have in Steve Bannon someone who the president understands they share a very similar philosophy. And that's why Steve and the president have such a bond, because that relationship has been long and developed, and they fundamentally agree on most of the issues.
He gets criticized for being everything from being a racist right on through, and so does the president. How does that make you feel when, this is a person, Trump, that you spent a lot of time with, that you mentioned? What is your opinion of some of that? I mean, I mean, these are pretty divisive statements. Not that he's not been a divisive candidate, but how does that make you feel when you know someone that well and this is the political reaction to what they're saying about him?
You know, it bothers me because they've never done their due diligence, the mainstream media, to go and actually understand Donald Trump. Not that he hasn't been accessible. From the time he launched his presidential campaign to the time the presidential campaign ended, he did 700 interviews with the New York Times. 700 different times he spoke to the New York Times in that period of time. It's unprecedented. And here's a very quick story. One day this New York Times reporter calls me, and I'd never spoken to her before, and we were on the airplane, and we were about to take off, and she said, I have a question I'd like to ask Mr. Trump, and I said, you know, what's your question? I'll relay the question, and he's sitting right in front of me. And I said, Mr. Trump, you know, it's Mary Smith from the New York Times, you know, she has a question, let me have the phone. Gets on the phone with her, answer the question. She hands the phone back to me, she said, I've been covering Hillary Clinton for 4 years, I've never once spoken to her in my life. Donald Trump doesn't know who this woman is, simply picks up the phone and has a conversation with her. He's that accessible to the media. And so when people make statements about him that says, you know, he doesn't respect women until you look at the number of women who are executives in his corporation. He doesn't respect minorities until you look at all of the minorities that he's employed throughout the years, tens of thousands. He doesn't respect, you know, Jewish people except his daughter and his grandchildren are Jewish. Whatever it may be, it's a much easier sell to say these things than it is to actually go and look at what the history actually tells us.
So you mentioned the New York Times. I wish you had mentioned the union leader, but
The failing New York Times, we're failing.
the New York Times said last week, coverage may eclipse that of any single human being. And they're talking about, of course, Donald Trump. And now we have this fight with the media. Do you think that that's more something that's used as a vehicle to have an enemy out there that the American public that he can basically fence with? Or is this more of a real feeling that he's being unfairly targeted by the media and he's reacting to that?
You know, I think it could be a little bit of both, but I do think that the media has been pejorative and sometimes very unfair to the president. You know, it's amazing when...
But they've been unfair to most presidents.
But when the media makes a mistake, and let me give you one example. A Time magazine reporter came into the Oval Office and he took a picture of the Oval, and he said, the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. has been removed. And he tweeted it out right away. Never contacted anyone in the White House. And he's a very fine guy. I know the reporter very well. He sent out 3,000 media outlets to cry the president for being a racist because he removed the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. from the Oval. You know what the fact was? The bust was never touched. He was standing behind a person who was standing there. And if it would have taken the 3 seconds to ask the White House, he wouldn't have had this. And the problem is, the first story is the one that gets reported, not the mistake, not the, hey, I apologize. And that happens time and time again. Look, in the last 2 weeks, the New York Times has written a story, the Wall Street Journal have written stories that are patently and unequivocally false. And as opposed to doing that and admitting it, what they say at the very end of the story, even though they have on-the-record sources saying it's factual or false, the White House disagrees with this. That's not fair journalism.
Well, despite it's not fair, Joe, I'd agree with that, but the presidents have always had things that they basically have created as an enemy. Harry Truman, Congress, Reagan, Congress, almost all of them Congress. Actually, we just filled that right in. But he seems to take a special liking to the media, and they seem to have a hard time defending themselves. So is this a new tactic?
No, the media continues to talk about themselves. See, what the media doesn't understand is nobody cares about the media. Right? They only care about themselves. They're so enraged that the president isn't going to come to the White House Correspondents' Dinner that that's all they want to talk about. They don't want to talk about the things he's accomplished and the campaign promises he laid out and what he's now fulfilling. So every day that the media talks about themselves is every day that they're losing. And if you look at the last Fox poll that showed that 45% of the people believe that the president gives information that's accurate and 42% believe that the mainstream media gives information that's accurate, that's a very telling story. The Media Research Center did a survey right after the election. 97% of the respondents from the Media Research Center said, we did not allow the media's bias to impact our vote. That's amazing, because it wasn't that long ago, Neil. You and I can remember this, some people here can't. The world got their news from 3 people at 6:30. ABC, NBC, CBS, those same 3 anchors delivered the news. They didn't make the news, they delivered the news. And the difference now is everyone is so quick to make the news for clicks, or subscriptions or whatever it may be. That's what drives them, not good journalism.
So you mentioned polling. Switching gears here a little bit. You know, the thing that fascinates most of us that are in the business of politics is how the polling was off. Most of us would have predicted that Hillary Clinton was going to win this by a landslide. I think most people, including our own team, believe that. Your campaign, the Trump campaign, had a very small victory party in a very small location in New York versus hers. So tell me, were the polls that the campaign had, were they those internals? Were they doing internals? Were those internals on the mark? What was the sense? Because it seems like everybody, including the Trump campaign, was surprised.
No, look, we looked at a couple different factors coming into the end of the race. The absentee ballot early voting was always a primary indicator, and the state of Florida was the most tumultuous for us because it has a huge Hispanic population, and we didn't know how they were going to break, if they're going to break where they historically do, or if they're going to break completely against us. Donald Trump ended up with 30 to 33% of the Hispanic vote, which is a very good number for a Republican, okay? But in Florida, the ABEV voters were exceptionally high, so we thought we could be in trouble in Florida, which is an absolute battleground state for us. North Carolina, what our numbers said was, we were going in on election day down about 225,000 votes, and to put that in perspective, Mitt Romney was down about 300,000 votes going in on election day. Mitt Romney carried North Carolina 5 years ago now, by about 77,000 votes, so we felt pretty good in North Carolina. Our numbers started to change rapidly. In Pennsylvania, we knew we'd win Ohio, we knew we'd win Iowa, and the Clinton campaign also knew that they couldn't win either of those states. But Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, they were very concerned about. The reason being is they took them for granted. They took the states for granted, and it wasn't until the last 10 days, the last 7 days, and really the last weekend. And look, selfishly, because I'm a New Hampshire guy, I wanted the last rally of the presidential campaign to be right here, and I planned it that way. I said the last rally of this presidential campaign is going to be at the Verizon Wireless Center, or SNHU Center, or whatever it's called now, because it's been very good to us. We had a rally there in a snowstorm on the night before the primary. I said, this is going to be it. And they said, it's going to be an 8 o'clock rally. I said, you can't have it at 8 o'clock. They said, why not? I said, because I know this president, he will not stop working at 8 o'clock on the night before the election. You're going to make this like the midnight rally, like Mitt Romney did 4 years ago. And they said, no. We're going to hit this one, this Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, we're going to stop. I said, guys, I know this guy. Please don't make this the last stop, because I know he's going to have another one. And he came here, and we had the big light show, and it was a massive blowout. Then he got on the plane, he went to Michigan. Right? He went to Michigan, and it was like this, thrown together, last-minute thing. It was the last rally of the campaign, and he landed back at LaGuardia at 3 o'clock in the morning because he wanted to go and stop one more time in Michigan, and it made a difference. Because we knew that if we could just make a turnout model that said the people who have not been engaged in the election process, who are fed up with a broken Washington because they've been lied to for 30 years, they shut up and voted, we won. And Hillary Clinton ended up, didn't connect with the African American community. Donald Trump got 8% of the vote, which I know doesn't sound great, but as a Republican, it's a historic number. With women, Donald Trump won with women. It's amazing when Hillary Clinton was the first female to hold the title of nominee for a major party. Donald Trump won with evangelicals. Donald Trump won across the board. And that's what nobody else saw. Everyone else said he lost the day he announced. And I was on the set of CNN. They were laughing at us at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I came back to the set about 10 p.m. and I knew we won. You know why I knew we won? Because I saw the numbers. Because I know numbers, okay? I know every county that they has to win. I know the 40 bellwether counties. I saw the numbers coming in. I said, this guy's going to be the President of the United States. And they said, nope. At 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. It was a foregone conclusion, guys. We won. And they told me I had to be magnanimous, which I refused to be.
So, speaking of New Hampshire, the subject of voter fraud comes up. He brings it up quite often. There was a union leader story last week about how many people showed up. I think there were 6,000 people in New Hampshire that showed up without any form of ID. What do you think about all that? I mean, you kind of said that you don't necessarily think there's widespread voter fraud in New Hampshire, but elaborate a little bit more about what you think about the voter fraud in New Hampshire, if there is any.
So here's my concern in New Hampshire, and it's something we need to get a better handle on. The way the law is written, unfortunately, it's not voter fraud. But if I feel like today, even though I live in Drake, Massachusetts, I'm going to go to New Hampshire and campaign for a candidate. I'm going to spend 3 or 4 days up there. And then I feel like I'm a New Hampshire resident. Man, I've really been here a lot of the last 72 hours. I feel good. I'm not going to go vote in New Hampshire. That's perfectly legal. That is a problem with the system. You know, if you're not paying taxes here, you're not a resident here, and here's how close these elections are in New Hampshire, right? Donald Trump lost the state of New Hampshire by 2,800 votes. Senator Kelly Ayotte lost by 790 votes. This is on a statewide election. You're talking minimal numbers. And it wasn't that long ago. Look, it's perfectly legal. Joe Biden, the Vice President of the United States at the time, his daughter was up here campaigning, living with Martha Fuller Clark on the seacoast, decided to register as a New Hampshire resident and vote in the New Hampshire primary. She was here for 4 weeks. That does not make you a New Hampshire resident. And then after the election, you get to pack up and go home. Now, is that legal voter fraud? No, it's not legal voter fraud. But you can't have it. There has to be a criteria. Maybe that means you've got to register 30 days before, or 60 days before, or you have to have a New Hampshire issued identification to vote here. These are simple things. Our democracy is too important. This state could have been. It wasn't because Donald Trump won a decisive electoral victory. But these 4 electoral votes have decided the outcome of a presidential election in the past. Ask George W. Bush. In 2000, if he did not win New Hampshire, he would not have been elected president of the United States.
So you're a New Hampshire guy, and you've been all around the country with Trump, seen all kinds of political things. What's the difference here? What's really the difference with New Hampshire? I mean, we see it, we think we see it because we're here all the time, but you've been all through. Tell me the difference.
I'm in every state, just about, had amazing opportunity. The sophistication level of the people of New Hampshire is second to none. They understand and take full responsibility for the great privilege that they have of being the first in the nation primary. It's so amazing to me that my friends on this campaign with the Trump campaign are here, and next time they'll be on the other side of a campaign. And these are my friends. These are our chairman and co-chairman and our county chairs, but next time they're going to support somebody else for the race, for some other race, whatever that is, governor, city council, state senate. I don't take it personally. I'm privileged that these people stay involved for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and they've had multiple candidates in their homes and opened them up so they can ask these people the tough questions. New Hampshire is such a special place because people take it so seriously here, and they need to. It's an obligation that nobody else has.
On that note, you are a New Hampshire guy. You're very eloquent. You have a master's degree in politics, right? So I think that a lot of people in politics who are on the back of the room many times wish that they were in the front of the room. Would you ever consider running for office in New Hampshire?
No, that's not for me. Yeah, you know what I know? I know I'm a staff guy. And I mean that in the best possible sense. I've had my share of the spotlight. I've been very fortunate. I've been on multiple TV shows and had the privilege to do Sunday shows and all that good stuff.
Just this week? I think
I
just
did
today.
a couple this week. I did today. I mean, Hannity. Look, that's a great privilege. But you know what I know? I know I can be more effective by helping somebody else be the best that they can be. And it's not for me to put my name there.
So we are going to take some questions from the audience at these 2 microphones. But as anyone who wants to ask a question, if you'd line up and start this. And one question, make the question quick if you can. But before we get into that, let me just ask one thing. So tomorrow night he's in Congress. He's speaking to a joint session. What do you expect?
So I think the theme of the speech tomorrow night is the renewal of the American spirit. And what I think the president's going to talk about is some broad themes. He's going to talk about what he's accomplished in the first 35, 36, 37 days of this administration, which are keeping the promises that he's outlined. Withdrawing us from the TPP, for every one new executive, one new federal regulation we'll have removed 2, helping coal miners get back to work, making a business-friendly environment. That's going to be a component. He's going to talk about the economic security and education security, meaning let's make sure our people have great education opportunities in the inner cities and the rural areas that they may not have right now. And let's make sure we're creating jobs so that we can grow our economy greater than 1%. And I think the third big theme he's going to talk about is, it's very important, vets, taking care of the veterans, making sure that they have money in the VA to take care of the people who need to be taken care of that took care of us, increasing spending on the military to make sure that they have the best tools available, and something that this campaign has really been focused around, which is border security. Having a wall built on the southern border, and what that implementation looks like, so that if we don't control our borders, we don't have a country. I think those are the big things that he's going to talk about tomorrow night. And I think the speech is going to be both a reminder of what he talked about in the campaign, but also very forward-looking of how to accomplish those things. It's also going to discuss Obamacare, the need to repeal and replace that, and
How long until that's replaced in your opinion? I mean, we're kind of over some January 27th deadline, so.
yeah, you know, I think that he has said during the press conference that he's going to submit his plan by the second week of March. That's a big part of it. He's already working with Secretary Price to do that and the leaders in Congress. And then the other big thing is fundamental and wholesale tax reform, the first one since 1986 when Ronald Reagan put forward a completely different tax code and a tax structure. That is something that is very difficult to do. There have always been these sacred cows in the tax structure that says you can't touch this or you can't touch that. And so you have to grow the government at greater than 1% to be successful. And in order to do that, you have to have a business environment where businesses want to hire and put more money in people's pockets.
All right, with that, we have a question. Right here.
Hi, first I'd like to thank you so much for being able to speak to us tonight. It was really an amazing experience. My question for you is, based on this unique campaign that you've been able to work on, do you have any advice for young people who'd like to be more involved in campaigns and who'd like to work on them in the future?
It's a great question. Let me say this. When I had just finished graduate school, I wrote to every member of Congress who received less than 55% of the vote in their last re-election campaign and said, I'm going to come out and run your campaign. Didn't know any of them. Wrote to every single one. And somehow this guy, sitting congressman, said, hey, why don't you come in and meet me? And I did, and I met him a couple times, and he said, I need you to move to Ohio. I've never been to Ohio. I've never been anywhere, right? And he said, pack up everything you own in your car and move to Ohio, and you'll be my campaign manager for my re-election campaign. You have to take a chance sometimes. And I went out and I worked as hard as I humanly could to help this guy get re-elected. He ended up with 65% of the vote. He made me his chief of staff after that. And what you have to do is you have to do stuff that other people aren't willing to do. If you ask any entrepreneur, anybody who's been successful, unless you were born on third base, and there's so few of us that were, okay, I wasn't born on third base. But you gotta go out and do stuff that no one else will. If that means packing up everything you own in your car and driving to a place that you've never been to go do something that you think you want to be good at, you gotta do it. And that's what campaigns are sometimes. And you gotta get lucky a little bit, but sometimes you make your own luck by hard work.
Thank you.
Since you've been coming here, by the way, our students rave about you, and they can't stop talking about all the stories you tell and how much impact you have, so we thank you for that. Another question over here?
Hi, so I'm a student journalist, and in that position, sometimes it's a little disheartening to see the media and the current president have such a negative relationship. So I was wondering, what would you say can be done on both sides of that issue to start kind of mending that relationship?
It's a great question. You know, the president is very magnanimous in private, and he has brought a number of these reporters in and tried to have a relationship with them. He's got a good pool of reporters. There's a pool. A pool is a group of reporters who are randomly assigned. One is a print reporter and one is a TV reporter. And what their job is if there's an issue that the full press corps can't cover, these people are assigned to cover it and then provide the transcript. And that's what Sean did. Now, he had those people and he had some others. But as an example, and I dealt with pools the entire presidential campaign. If the CNN reporter happened to be the pool camera that particular day, they would have been in the room. Or if the New York Times reporter would have happened to been the pool camera that day, they would have been in the room. It just so happened that the individual who was the pool camera, I think was NBC, who has been less than great to the President of the United States, was in the room, but that's because that's how the pool was set up. So again, the press wants to talk about, it's unprecedented that the president excluded someone from an off-the-record gaggle in a room that's about half the size of this stage. Everything was made available to everybody. The transcript was fully available to everybody. Nobody missed any news. The press wants to talk about themselves and how they've been so wrong. Something American people care about.
Next question.
Thank you very much, both of you. How would you, or I guess the promises that candidate Trump made during the campaign, do you think that he's going to fulfill those, and which do you think he'll prioritize as president?
You know, I think if you look at what the president has tried to accomplish in the first 38 days of this administration through the executive order actions which he has implemented, he is fulfilling the promises of this campaign. And I don't know if you saw, but this week the Department of Homeland Security put out their first solicitation for the designs of a wall on the southern border, something that he has campaigned very heavily on. So if you look at tax cuts, saving Social Security and Medicare, repealing and replacing Obamacare, building a wall on the southern border. You know, these have been, in general, the themes of the campaign. Withdrawing the United States from TPP, you know, labeling China a currency manipulator, redoing bilateral deals as opposed to multilateral deals, relooking at NAFTA, making sure that if companies are going to leave our country to produce goods, there will be a recourse for that. He has talked about those things, creating an environment inside the business community that is healthy. Look, you can look at the stock market. The stock market is through the roof because for the first time in 8 years, you have a federal government which is no longer reactionary and/or aggressive against companies, but is actually trying to help companies grow. And it's a very different mindset with the people he's brought into the government.
Some of the things that have happened in the last several weeks are that he will say something and then Pence and many of the cabinet members will sort of spend the rest of the week reversing that. We had a speaker here the other night who said, well, Pence will be the first prime minister of the United States doing so. But what do you think about that relationship? I mean, how healthy is that the vice president goes out and has to sort of walk us back?
You know, I had the privilege, which is an amazing privilege, to chair the selection committee for the Vice President of the United States. You want to talk about an awesome power? I had the privilege of putting names on a list to run by candidate Trump and say, here are the people I think would be qualified to be your vice president, sir. And he said, go out and interview. And I did. And Mike Pence is a good, honorable man, sometimes too good to be in Washington. I had that conversation with him just recently. I said, you know, Vice President Pence, you're such a good man, you probably don't believe in the swamp. You shouldn't be in the swamp. He's such a good man. He and the president have an unbelievably strong relationship. Mike has been such a steadfast supporter of the president and so good that if the vice president were to go and help smooth things over, particularly on Capitol Hill, where he has unbelievably good relationships with other governors, because that's where, you know, the vice president is from, the president is open to that. And the president is very, very open to the vice president being the lead on issues that the vice president wants to be engaged in, including Obamacare repeal, including tax reform, including the narratives up on Capitol Hill where Mike has strong relationships with members of both the House and the Senate. And the president doesn't have those same relationships because he doesn't have those years of history up there. These two individuals work hand in glove together, and I don't think there's ever been a
So
time.
they're working definitely close together.
Unbelievably
So it could be
close.
that the president maybe said something that he needed to walk back, and instead of, as you mentioned earlier, the apology never comes, but Pence will come and smooth it out.
Vice President Pence is a very good individual of interpreting the president and then re-announcing that.
By the way, I think Vice President Cheney would say that that is a great job picking the vice president.
You know, he did, I didn't pick myself, so that's pretty smart. Did get a
Next
good
question.
Thank you. What challenges do you foresee for President Trump in the unification of the Republican Party?
Well, the good news is I think it's pretty clear that he is now the head of the Republican Party, both de facto and by a faction of simply being the President of the United States. But the challenge that many face, particularly in states where you have Republicans holding office that came to their respective offices before the president was elected, they're not sure if they should embrace the president or if they should run from him or try and walk a fine line.
Like a Kasich.
John Kasich's a good example. Bruce Rauner in Illinois is a good example. They're not sure what to do because they're not sure if they step away from the president, what happens to that whole group of individuals who supported the president in his campaign that need them to win. It's very difficult if you're a sitting elected official to now criticize the incumbent president of the United States of your own party. And what I think you have an opportunity to see coming up in 2018 is there are 10 states that there are incumbent Democrat U.S. senators who are sitting there in states that Donald Trump won for president. And that gives Republicans running in those places a great opportunity tied to the Trump agenda moving forward. But in states like Ohio, where there has been, more than a public discourse between the president and Governor Kasich, who was in the White House, I think, just this week or late last week. Look, it's unfortunate, but you have to work together because at some point, The governors are going to need help from the federal government, and you want to have the best relationship possible for your constituents.
You mentioned 2018, but in 2020, do you think he's going to be on the ballot? Do you
I don't
think the
think
president will?
I don't think he's ever quit anything in his life. I think he's going to run. I think he would win. Look, look, I don't want to be hyper-partisan here. Okay, I happen to know something about this stuff, but I don't want to be hyper-partisan. The left wing of the Democratic Party has gone so far to the left with the Bernie Sanders wing that it is almost impossible for them to win in middle America. They can win in California, they can win in Washington State, they can win in Oregon, they can win in Massachusetts, they can win in Vermont. The problem is, when you look at those middle states, it's very hard for them to win because they don't have the message of economic freedom anymore. They don't have the message of putting people back to work. And they have taken people for granted. And if they continue to take the African American community for granted, particularly in those big cities, it will be so at their own demise. And what I saw today, I just saw this, the president had like 100 African American leaders in the Oval Office today, talking about his recommitment to the African American colleges that are around and making sure they have all the resources they need from the federal government to be successful. He is going to make inroads in places where traditional Republicans haven't and can't, because that's the type of person he is, because he's a consensus builder.
Another question.
Going off of what you were saying earlier about during the primaries, we heard a lot about the establishment and Republicans fighting each other. And there was a question of whether Republicans would gather around and embrace Trump, as he was an untraditional candidate and what people weren't used to. How did your team and the candidate and now president himself deal with that when it came to during the primaries, uniting Republicans?
Yeah, we didn't. We didn't care. It's the greatest part. You have a complete outsider who didn't need their money or their endorsements and didn't belong to the same country clubs they did. And the amazing part was the only time we ever went to Washington, D.C. in the primary was to go check on the hotel that he was building. We didn't go down there and beg congressmen for endorsements. As a matter of fact, the first congressional endorsement we ever received wasn't until after we won the Nevada caucus on February 24th of last year. Congressman Chris Collins from New York made an endorsement, and he called up and he said, "I'm interested in endorsing Donald Trump." We said, "Great." He goes, "Well, can I talk to him?" What would you like? I said, "Just go endorse him. Endorse him, don't endorse him, we don't care. We're not going to run the party establishment." Because you know what happened? If endorsements mattered, Jeb Bush would be the President of the United States today. It doesn't work that way, okay? Your endorsement is good for exactly one vote, which is yours, and I think half those guys probably didn't vote for Jeb anyways. Because it doesn't work that way anymore, right? The American people are smart. I say it all the time. They want someone who is not beholden to Washington special interests, who can fund his own campaign, that's going to do what's right by the American people and not be beholden to other people because they want a job. And we didn't go out and embrace the establishment. We said, look, we are going to be the outsiders, right? Us and Dr. Carson, we were the outsiders. And if you look at the two people from the time we got into the race who were leaders in this race, there are only two of us. Donald Trump ran almost wire to wire. It's never been done, except for literally 2 days in Iowa. Dr. Carson passed us. And then Donald Trump stood up and gave the famous belt buckle speech where he said, "Come stab me," or whatever in the belt buckle, like Dr. Carson. And that was it. In Dodge City. The outsider. Washington has been fundamentally broken for so long, Republican or Democrat. They have lied to the American people. We have $20 trillion in debt. We bring in $4 trillion a year. Put that in perspective. If you have $20,000 in your credit card and you make $4,000 a year, and then you have to pay for all the other things that you make on $4,000 a year, how are you ever going to pay off $20,000 in your credit card? It cannot happen. That's what we have done. And the American people said, we've tried everything else. We've tried the establishment. We've tried the families. We've tried everybody else, and it's never worked. Let's go try something different. And that's what we did in the primary. And Donald Trump won in New Hampshire, then he went to South Carolina and won, then he went to Nevada, and then we won 38 times, and he received more votes in the Republican primary than any candidate in the history of the Republican Party.
But now he has to deliver. I mean, and change is subjective. You know, a lot of times your change is different than somebody else's change. So now he's got to deliver. If he doesn't necessarily deliver 100%, are some of those voters going to drop off, some of the Trump voters?
Sure, look, I have said this, and Steve Bannon, who's a friend of mine, said this at CPAC the other day. You need to hold this administration accountable. And I mean that in the absolute best sense of the word and the worst sense of the word. If these elected officials make promises to us and they don't hold them, they need to be voted out of office. And there has been no one who's been a bigger cheerleader than the president. You know, I've had the privilege of traveling all around the country since the election. Everybody I run into says, I was the first supporter of Donald Trump. That's not true, okay? Let me tell you, I turned the lights on in the building. Okay? There was nobody there before I was. Everybody bought the winning lottery ticket the day after they called the number. It was amazing. But that's okay. But at the end of the day, you have to hold candidates accountable. Whether it's city council, state house, state senate, governor, U.S. Senate, or the president of the United States, who's a friend of mine, if you do not deliver on the things that you have promised, then you will be held accountable, and I think that's our obligation.
Next question over here.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Mr. Lewandowski, for coming tonight. I have a question about the travel ban. Recently, a few weeks ago, the Ninth Circuit Court struck it down and denied the stay for the TRO. What will the Trump administration do if they are to release a new travel ban to make sure that the federal courts do not file an injunctive TRO against the order?
It's a good question, and the short answer is that what you have, look, I'm not here to make disparaging comments about the Ninth Circuit, although I should. Look, they are the most overturned court in the country. They're a kangaroo court, unfortunately. And what they are is they are justices who want to legislate from the bench. And if you want to be a legislator as a federal judge, you can do what the governor of Nevada did. He was a federal judge. He stepped off the bench and ran for office and became a governor. You're absolutely entitled to do that. The difference is, it's a question of constitutionality. That's all it comes down to. As a federal judge, you have to determine, is what is being done or said constitutional within the law? It doesn't matter if I agree or disagree, is it constitutional? The Ninth Circuit has stepped in and said that the president does not have the constitutional authority to limit people's visas coming in from countries that are potential terrorists. It's 100% factually inaccurate. There's no question about it. It has been implemented on numerous occasions, particularly in World War II, when we said we're not going to issue visas from people coming in from Japan because we happen to be at war. There's no constitutional question about it. And what I think you will see in the coming week is a new executive order coming out of the administration, most likely the tail end of this week, which further limits what the president will do to preclude people from coming here who want to cause us harm. The single biggest job, in my opinion, of the President of the United States is only one. There's only one. To keep our citizens safe from all enemies, foreign and domestic. If we cannot be safe, then he has not done his job.
Could the rollout have been better?
Sure. No, the rollout should have been better. But the difficult part was Jeff Sessions was stuck in the Senate confirmation hearing. It was not confirmed that then Senator Sessions, Attorney General Sessions, there was no Solicitor General, is no Solicitor General in place. The information which was distributed to the respective government agencies, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State, did not seem to be adequate at the time. They were caught by surprise. There didn't seem to be enough communication between the administration and the people on Capitol Hill who were either in oversight capacities or had some jurisdiction over what was taking place. The rollout could have been better, but it doesn't mean what was rolled out wasn't constitutional. And what's very, very important are that there are three separate and unique branches of the federal government for a reason. And you don't just get to be the judge and the jury to say, I don't like what the president has said, I'm going to stop him because I'm a federal judge. Because a federal judge in Boston said, this is perfectly legal. So they have two competing federal judges. And now we have a Supreme Court which is tied 4-4 who hasn't taken up this case because Gorsuch is sitting and waiting for a confirmation hearing. I think what you'll see this week is a new executive order on this. And then the question of constitutionality, like I believe, even in a more limited scope, this new executive order that will come out will be challenged by the same exact court, and the Ninth Circuit will take this up again. The question is, does the president have the constitutional authority to do this? And the answer is unequivocally yes.
Well, is that a wise move with Gorsuch up?
Okay, I think there is nothing more important than the safety of our country. And it wasn't that long ago, unfortunately, where we had a woman come into this country under a K-1 visa. And a K-1 visa means that you married a U.S. citizen, you came in from another country, perfectly legally. The State Department, in their infinite wisdom, because of the rules and regulations of this country, did not do their due diligence or couldn't do their due diligence to check her social media activity. That woman came into San Bernardino and committed a jihad and killed a number of Americans. She came in perfectly legally. We need to have a better understanding of who's coming into our country. And if that means extreme vetting, it is a high privilege to come to the United States of America and to become a citizen here. We are the greatest country in the world, and we can never forget that.
I think we got time for one more, right here.
Hi, thank you for coming. As a young politics major, I'm sure you've answered this question a million times at other schools and events, but if you could give one piece of advice to a young politics major who wants to get involved, what would that be?
Look, take an internship. Start right now. Start meeting friends, elected officials. Go up to the State House. Look, I grew up in Lowell, Massachusetts. There weren't any Republicans down there, so I met this guy who's a state representative. He's a Democrat state representative, and I said, hey man, I'll come and work for you for free, dude, because I got nothing else to do all day, right? I'm in college. And I took the train every day down to Boston to work for him, back and forth. I fell asleep on the train and halfway back to Boston half the time because I missed my stop, right? He was a first-term state rep. He went on to become a state senator, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, a conservative Democrat. His name was Steve Pan. His name still is Steve Pangiotakis. He hasn't gone anywhere. It's still his name. But he's not a state senator anymore. But you know what that relationship did? I look back now 25 years ago. He helped me on the right path. And when you're involved and people are killing you, believe me, man, I took a lot of arrows in this campaign from a lot of people supposed to be my friends. They'd call Senator Pangiotakis. What was Corey Lewandowski like when he interned for you back when he was a freshman in college? And you get a reference for a guy who has no agenda other than to tell people what it's really like. You have to be willing to do that. And if you do that, you go up to the State House, you work for free, you find a State House candidate or a State Senate candidate or a City Council candidate or a big mayor candidate, and you go and put your time in, and today, you're the guy who is answering the phones and making signs, and tomorrow in the next campaign, you're the guy who's running the local race. The day after that, you're running the congressional race. And by the time you're 25 years old, you're a chief of staff to a congressman. And it just keeps going if that's really what you want to do. And you will know, just internally. Look, I have no changeable skills, so I get involved in politics, right? I can't do anything. I have nothing else I can offer, so this is all I know how to do, okay? You're going to know if you love it. You're going to know if it's what you're passionate about. If you do it, man, you just got to go all in. That's it.
Corey, I want to thank you for coming tonight. This has been a real treat. Before we kicked off the first of our New Hampshire Live podcast series, so it's the first one. We're going to have many more speakers. But again, thank you very much. The man from New Hampshire, Corey Lewandowski.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.